Hi, guys. My name is Joe Spadaro. I've been chosen as moderator of this little panel up here. I'm sorry. You can't hear me? What the hell you want me to do? Stick in my ear?
No, he's getting sound.
You're okay, he said. Go ahead.
He can hear. He can hear.
As long as he can hear you, then I can listen.
Okay.
She can't hear though.
Anyhow, I've been chosen as the moderator, and I've never moderated anything in my life, so I really don't know what the hell I'm doing, but I've got some ideas I might try on you people. First thing I would ask you to do is to take a few minutes and look at the boats that are in this room. When you get through all of the boats that are in this room, can you describe to me what an Adirondack guide boat is, what it looks like, perhaps how it was even built? Probably you'll have a lot of questions. If you have questions, you come up here, you can get an answer. I can guarantee mine are always accurate. They're not very good, but they're accurate. And you're going to find out whatever you want to know about those boats, you can find out from this panel here. If I don't know it, someone else does. These guys have done a lot more building than I have. I've only built about 10 or 12 boats. The last couple boats I built were Warren Cole boats, which I think is the prettiest boats. I built a lot of Vassar-style boats. Way back when in 1980, we learned how to take the patterns of an existing boat so we could transfer it to poster board, make ribs for it, and build the same boat. We learned how to do that, and we did quite a bit of it. But of all the boats that I built, the Vassar was my favorite until I built the Warren Cole, the one that's down at the Vic Center in Newcomb. If you go down that way, that's the boat that I built, and so is John here's built. So what I would ask you to do is to look around and see what you think about the boats, or how you would phrase any kind of question that you might have, and we can surely give you a reasonable answer. If the answer doesn't exist at this table, it doesn't exist unless someone makes it up. That's all there is to it. We tried this last year. It was wide open, and it worked out pretty well, I thought. Everybody gave a little speech, and people asked questions. And don't feel embarrassed if you don't know. We don't know. I don't know what these guys know. I got an idea I know what they know, but I really don't. And they don't know what I know, because I don't share it with everybody. Unless their students want to learn something about chemistry or mathematics or something like that. So what we're going to do, I assume, I've got a list of people that are sitting up here next to me. Barry Cantwell. Chris Woodward's right here. Mark Miller. Chris Dyer. John Seaman. Who else is here?
Wally Wilcox. Oh, we got Steve Wilcox. Jim Sawsville.
Jim Sawsville.
All got their... Barry
Got in first. He's a Cantwell. He started his
Everybody at this table has built guide boats. They built different pattern guide boats. Different people were copied by them. So you know a little bit about each one. Some of the boats that I have seen here have a lot of rocker in them. And the rocker in a guide boat is the bottom board of the boat is curved. So that if you were to put these boats on the floor, you could literally rock back and forth on them because it has a slight curve to it. And that's so that you can turn them. You take a 16-foot boat with a straight keel with no rocker, try to go across the lake, good luck. You better pack a lunch because you're not going to turn. You're going to keep going in one direction. These so you can turn them on the lake. Going down the river, you'd get killed in the boat with a flat rocker because you couldn't turn the darn thing. You can back it up and try to turn it. When you look at the boats that you see around here, you'll see a set of oars. Most of them have oars. Every one of them either has oars or they're setting aside somewhere. And there's a guy in the stern that has a guide boat paddle. Is there a guide boat paddle there, Chris?
It's three, the one with the lollipop top, as I call it.
Hold that up, Steve, would you please?
Yeah, that one.
When you look at this paddle here, I've got a couple over on my boat too. When you look at this, it doesn't have diddly for a blade. You wouldn't want to have to go across the lake with just this paddle. And what it was for is not so much paddling, but for sterning the boat. The power of the oars is overwhelming. It's amazing how much power you can get out of the boat, out of the oars. And what this was used for is the person in the stern of the boat would use that as a rudder to correct any drift that the boat might have as it's going across. when you look at that, you say to yourself, that's not worth anything as a paddle, and it really isn't worth anything as a paddle, but it's a hell of a good rudder, and that's what it's made for. Is that what that is?
Grant made those too. Caleb Chase. The ones I've seen were Chase out of Newcomb's.
The other thing you'll notice when you look at all the boats in the room, everyone, almost everyone, has a different deck. The deck is also characteristic of the builder. The deck was kind of their signature. They never used to put little tags on it, say who built it. They didn't care. One guy copied another guy, he copied another guy. Pretty soon, they didn't even know who the hell started the whole thing going on, but they all learned from that one person, unbeknownst to them who the person even was. Someone tell, oh, that's a Chase, or that's a Woodward, or that's a Spadaro, or that's some. They don't know who the hell it was. So what do? You agree with them. Sure, why not? I don't either. So we've copied boats for years. And some of the people that are sitting at this table are a lot better at it than I am. I can build a boat. You can see some of it over here. It's one of my... This boat that I built planked in white cedar. And if you get a chance after, go pick up the paddle that's there and see how heavy it is. I think the boat weighs about 40 pounds. When the bio says 35, well, that might be stretched a little bit. But it's a very pretty boat, and it's a very light boat. All the Vassar boats were nice-looking boats. You can look around this room, and if you look at the profile of the stem, by the way, where's Slavic's boat? Book.
Joe, could I ask a question?
Sure.
I'd like to ask a question of my son. My son built a strip boat. What is that, Chris? What is a strip boat? I mean, he's...
Hurting you right up.
I know, right?
I thought we torqued you right up to it.
Well, a stripper is a modern interpretation. Modern construction techniques.
What are the differences between, because it looks like, from the outside, it looks like...
From the outside, it looks the same.
What's
The shape, yeah. No, it's similar wood, but you're using epoxy, glue, fiberglass, modern materials.
Okay. Somebody told me it doesn't have any ribs. Is that...
No ribs, right?
No ribs.
You don't need them.
Paul back from Vermont did put ribs in some of his guide boats, and I raced with Henry Jacoby from the two-man before, and he had a boat that the ribs just popped off the fiberglass because they wouldn't stick with epoxy.
He does. He does
Just for appearance.
Michael Burton, Mick Burton, I can't remember the last name, Mick Burton, he does, he puts ribs in his whole strip boats. He do beautiful boats, plain boats and strip boats.
So which is
You
better?
gotta look close, you gotta walk up, you can't walk up.
Think of the drag at the bottom of the boat. At the bottom of the boat, most standard traditional guide boats, like Chris makes and all the original boat builders make, they use usually screws to hold the planking on. And they didn't cover the holes where the screws are. It's never been covered. So that if you had to repair them, all you needed is a jackknife and a regular screwdriver, right, Chris? To fix a guide boat.
Get at it, anyway.
And so they were repairable. So if your fiberglass bolt fits a punch in it, you can fix them, but it's going to be a fun job.
But it's smoother.
Yeah, it's a lot smoother. It doesn't have the drag that, and you know, they used to want to race them against these traditional boats, and they are definitely faster because they don't have the ribs, most of them. They're a little bit smoother, less drag in the water.
They also are more rigid. So with the flexible ribs and all the joints of each plank is a separate joint, the boat flexes. So when you pull on the oars, some of that energy is going into flexing the boat. In a stripper boat where it's so much more rigid, more of that energy is going straight into running the boat. And so they're faster. They're just... But that also depends who you got on the oars is a big part of it.
The year that
Yeah, an old guy needs the advantage.
Separation in the Hanmer coming up between traditional and modern.
the year that
We don't want
the
to
year
get
that Imperial won the race with a stripper, fiberglass stripper.
Right.
That was the start of, they had to be traditional boat to race in the hand.
Right, but
I don't know where the rule went. I don't know where the rule went, but that's the rule.
But so the rules have been changed to allow head-to-head racing strippers, right? Am I correct? Because it just ended up, most of the boats entering a race was a strip boat. And it's like, well, it's not a traditional boat, but run them head-to-head. And they are faster.
When you start,
I'm a 16-year-old kid in that 17-footer I got that goes 29 miles strip boat. You go everybody off in that race because it shouldn't be.
Right.
It shouldn't be in there.
That might be addressed for another year.
I lost that argument.
I know.
But I understand. Now, I wasn't there when this happened. I might have been, but I probably tried to report it. That the traditional boats voted to allow them to run. Why would they? I don't need to start this race thing because I want you to talk about building technique. But we have a racer here from the glory days
Right.
that might have an opinion about that. Should we go back to traditional? Because I know that you, for example, have given a special award this year, which is a beautiful paddle that you made, and it is for the fastest traditional boat down the river.
If you're not going to separate the two out, I wanted to just, to highlight the traditional
I think
boats.
it's a good idea too, to let them race together against each other, because most people can't afford a nice guide boat. They want to race. I mean, guide boats are expensive. There's no question. Seriously.
Well, and you're running down the river, you can crack a rock with a strip-built boat a little harder than you can with a traditional boat. Eventually, but as Barry said, once you put a hole in a strip boat, the way you got to fix it is completely different. You can't take a piece of wood out of patch and put a patch in. It's like you glop more glass on, and then you're grinding dust, and I'm gonna die from a lung full of cedar dust, but it's gonna be natural. It's not gonna be no glass in these lungs.
John,
I'll be just as dead.
You brought your boat how many thousand miles to compete in this race? And it's a traditional boat. It's probably heavier than a stripper. And how do you feel about that?
Well, I live in Wisconsin, and back in the early 70s, I was going to Milwaukee School of Engineering. And my dad, Howard, got me into guide boat racing. He raced a traditional boat in the first 44-mile marathon on Lake Tuckerley in 1969, and he finished second place. And I think it was 7.5 hours. So when I got back from college, he said, "John, you gotta get into racing." So I practiced and practiced. In May and in mid-June, we had the 44-mile, which I won that race in 8 hours and 30 minutes when we had storms on the lake and I had to fight the wind and the waves. The racing canoes had to stay near shore. They had to dump every once in a while, but I could plug right down the lake. And that was quite an experience for me, as you can well imagine. I'm going to defer my thoughts on traditional versus strippers until we get a little further toward the end of the discussion, because I have my own opinions. And I think this panel right now should talk about maybe the construction of the boat and a little more details on how you build a traditional boat. I raced the Willard Hanmer race in 1970 and won it. 71, 72, 73 I won. In 1974, I finished fourth because I had some issues at the carrier. And then again, that was a personnel issue that I won't go into. But then in 75, I came back and won again. And in 76, I finished in second place. So out of 7 years, I have 5 Willard Hanmers under my belt as first place. So those were the days that I felt I could do anything. I was in my early 20s, and I really worked at it. I would go out and practice 4 hours a night, 3 or 4 times a week. And it was one of those days that you had to believe in yourself in order to do it. So my dad was a great mentor, and in the following years after I stopped competitive racing, my dad spent all almost 10 years mentoring Long Lake kids into the guideboat races. Chuck Kitchen and the Spanglers, and there's just so many names of kids that my dad helped mentor, and there was a real resurgence of guideboat racing in the early to mid-70s. So I feel proud to be part of it. It's 50 years later, 54 years later, and this would be my 50th anniversary of my loss here in 1974, so I'm here to make retribution.
Well, and I agree, and I'm sorry that I dragged you off into this question, but yes, let's get back to building. Anybody have a builder's question?
She has a question.
Are these the boats that are going to be racing on Sunday?
Could be.
There is.
I think these are mostly.
No.
Here, it will be in the race for sure, that's the black one. I don't think anybody else on the family has a boat.
No.
Here is the race, but I know the black one's supposed to.
But they have in the past come and taken their boat out.
Right.
As a matter of fact, I think one of them was yours.
Last year, yes, yeah. But no, none of these actual boats will race.
They're the same.
Do these still go in the water?
Oh, yeah.
And so to maintain the beautiful look of the boat, when it comes out of the water, is there anything special you do?
Pay me the big bucks. You want to rinse the sand out of them. Now, how you take a finish off or how you put a finish on, you use something called sandpaper. And I try to explain this to people because it's like, well, why do I got to rinse the sand out of my boat? It's like, well, that's like 36 grit sandpaper. It just wears it. So, and old leaves, when you put it away in the fall, just get the old leaves and everything out of it. The boats want to be dry.
Yeah.
They really, the oldest boats are where you used them, they went right back up in the rack in the boathouse, out of the sun, out of the weather, used it the next day. You didn't leave it on your lawn or whatever. So there is a little basic maintenance to them, yes. And but the finish, varnish finish is just, they look the nicest when you lay your varnish brush down, and they just deteriorate from there. So on any one of these boats, a painted boat or a varnished boats especially, every 5 or 6 years you're going to give it another coat or two. Some people do it every year, depending on the wear of the boat.
If you look at this little boat over here, 12-footer, it's been in the water 3 times in 25 years. 3 times. First time to make sure it didn't leak. Second time to make sure that the first time was accurate. And the third time I took my wife in the boat, we rowed across the lake. We had that much freeboard in such a small boat. But if the finish... Beg pardon?
On Sunday cars?
Well, sort of. The finish on the boat is impeccable because it's never been used. And it is ever going to be used. I'll give it to a museum or something someday, but I'm not going to put it in the water again. I'm not going to let anybody use it again. These boats have been used for years, and Chris is right. These guys maintained them. Some of them never did. The boats got sick, and they got worse and worse and worse. But it's a lot of upkeep to maintain them. It really, truly is.
You've got to remember, too, that the guide boats were done by craftsmen. They're specific to the way they're built, the way they're designed, and what they do, for the guides to use them as they did. And when the boats are properly maintained, they'll last forever without a lot of maintenance.
Yeah.
I have an 1885 Willard Cole, or Warren Cole boat. I have a varnished one, and then I have my green painted one. And the varnished boat is all the original patina from back then, from the original camp. I have the original oars with the owner's initials on them. I have the yoke of the paddle with his initials on it. I have his name tag on the boat, and I have the built by Warren Cole in Long Lake, New York name tag on the boat. So again, it's a beautiful boat, and I do display that at shows.
So if you look at the 2 boats over in the corner there, the green ones, well, that's the original boats were painted. They were work boats. They were a classic work boat. Guide, you're hauling that through the brush into the pond, way over. Well, paint is got way more pigments in it, so it's a much more durable finish, and it protect the boat better. Once they got the big estates and the hotels came, then they started varnishing them because that's what people wanted, the look of the boat, and they weren't dragging the boat 4 or 5 miles back into a pond. But essentially, under that paint is the exact same boat. There's nothing different between it except that one's got varnish and that one's got. And that's the other thing. You can hide in, you tuck right in under the hemlocks and cedars, and you'd never see it sitting in there. But there's a lot less maintenance on a painted boat because the paint is just so much more durable. As far as making them look perfect, or as good as you can.
For a fisherman, this boat would blind you in a bright sunny day like today as well. Whereas an old painted boat with flat paint that wasn't shiny, absorbed the sun, the camouflage, and beautiful as they are.
The old
a lot more work than getting out the old bucket of lead paint that they had at the bottom of the boat out.
This is when you charge people $200 a ride.
Right.
The old guys believe, from what I've read and heard, that a lot of times their bottoms were painted blue. So when the fish looked up, they didn't see the boat. And the green, you know why they like the green? And then they're on shore, they face the green side towards the carrot. So nobody, they look in the woods and there's no boat there, That's simple reasoning, but they used to sleep under these boats. When they're out
Shelter half, yeah.
First class I took in boat building with Carl, and I took it with Chris. First thing Carl said to it is, take your tape and throw it away. You don't need a tape to build a guide boat. You need to know that the board is 8 foot long, maybe. You measure that. That's the only thing you're going to use the tape for. If you don't have a builder's eye, if you don't have the eye of the beautiful boat and what it should look like, you're not going to build a nice boat. I don't care how much measurements you do, how many angles you try, it's just not going to work. Some people can build a nice boat, some people can't build a nice boat.
That's the artistic eye you're talking about.
Oh, absolutely.
Art of the boat building craft.
Chris, do you want to take a minute and go through how you make the ribs?
I'll do that, yes.
Can I ask you a question first before you go? I think this applies to that. I just heard the other day, first time, that when we, the idea of building one of these boats starts below the ground.
Well, that's what I was just about to get
Up
into.
to stuff.
So you want me to do this, Joe?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, can I grab that? So the first thing to build a guide boat, first tool you use is a shovel.
Lots of black fly dough.
And what you're going for is a spruce root. So this is, if I think I've got the aspect right, it looks like this would be the trunk of a tree. This is ground level right in here, and this is a big spruce root growing from a stump. And so you dig that stump up, you slab it up into slabs like this. And you can see the grain, how it turns with that stump. Well, that's the grain that follows the grain of that rib. It's going to fit something like that. So when we saw these out, and you saw them out of this, you don't bend it. It gets sawn so that the grain follows the root, or the grain of the rib follows the root. And now you've got a very strong, but yet lightweight piece of wood for the framework of this. This I see is laid out for a stem, which is the same. These are the pieces on the ends, and you can see how would be a blank stem coming out of that, following the same curve of that spruce root. And again, that's what's giving the boat now this framework. That's what gives the boat its internal strength. From there, we go to planking. Most of the old boats I work on are pine. And some of them, the original ones, were built of cedars. I found I didn't think the cedar lasted as long because it was so light and not as strong as the pine. But it's 8 pound or so difference in the boat, and it's a little more rot resistant. But Adirondack cedar doesn't really grow nice and clean and clear the way it does along the Great Lakes or Maine, or especially coming out of Maine. It's full of knots. It's swamp grown. It's hollow. The knots don't shed. The branches don't shed, so it's all dark knots. It's hard to get really nice, clean cedar. And going through all the great camps in the Adirondacks, I have discovered where all that nice cedar went. It went to friggin' rafters and posts and something in these huge great. It's like, I could build 20 boats from those rafters there.
I think the advantage of pine too is it's easier to work with. It holds its shape better.
Exactly.
And it also is easier to get a long board knot free.
Right. And yeah, because pine, of course, being our biggest tree, you can get a 16, 20-inch wide board, 16 feet long. I mean, you can plank. The first boat I ever built for Carl, I used 8 planks to get all the planking out of it, including the bottom board. And one root thing. So, I mean, minimal, the huge, this boat builder, this isn't going to be, I've never saw material like that again.
What you can do when you go around, look at the boats, look at the ribs, and you'll see exactly what he's talking about. The grain follows the shape of the rib and so on. This rib here is tamarack, and it's as good as spruce as far as I'm concerned. But when you look at this was one of the faults.
Right.
See the grain, how it goes across here? That's a weak rib. That's why it wasn't used. It was made, and they were going to put it in the boat, and they looked at that carefully. Can't use it. That'll snap right there. I just bring this around to show people what it looks like. That's all. And that boat over there is all cedar, but it's 25 years old. He's right. It hasn't been used. You use it, you're going to ding it up. I ding it up just taking it to shows.
Crack them and...
Yeah. I don't know where I could get any cedar to repair it if I break it.
Ralph would never bring a boat to a show. Ralph Morrow.
You have to go to the hooker lot to get the big cedar.
Where?
The hooker lot. The hook
by crook club.
That kind of a place.
Yeah.
And you cut them, where do you get the plate? You get them, can we bring your little boat up and you can show that?
Which?
Planking.
The planking, how do you put that on?
Well, it's all fitted, and I'm not going to move that.
Show it.
Well, so a plank going on a boat, if you look, here we go, see? They're not, there's 7, 8, 6, but I use 8, Saranac Lake, the other ones use 7 planks on a boat, but they don't run straight. They're not just a straight board that just flops on the boat, because the boat's curved. It's curved lengthwise, it's curved from side to side, it's curved all the way up to the stems, to the middle, and it comes around a twist of the curve of the rib. So when you put a plank in it, it kind of wants to sweep, so you have to have most of them are sort of S-shaped. So when you're drawing it in and it turns, it falls into place. But you have to fit every plank, and everyone's different. And then each plank gets a bevel. I don't know if you're going to be able to see this. About 5/8 of an inch wide, 1/4 inch thick planking, 5/8 of an inch wide bevel. People say, what's the angle? They have to know an angle. It's like it's 5/8 inches wide by 1/4 inch thick. You go to a feather. You don't need a protractor to tell you what the angle is. And then each plank is going to overlap each other. And they're both beveled so that when they overlap, you have a smooth skin on that. And then that's screwed onto the boat. This lap then is tacked. So if you look, and this is sort of the difference, I want to keep this in mind, because these are all the differences between a strip-built boat and a traditional built boat. So then this seam is all tacked with little tiny tacks, and you hold an iron on the other side, and as you bang it, it turns and cinches. And you put one from the inside, so you have 2 opposing cinches holding this lap together. This is what makes the boat watertight, is this wood-to-wood joint. So you see all the little tacks on that. Yep, they're tiny. And there's like 2,500, maybe 3,000 little tacks in that boat.
And keep in mind, each tack has a hole that has to be drilled.
You punch a hole, yeah, and then you push the tack in with your thumb.
There's no glue in a guide boat.
And
That's
so
what I forgot.
they're not glued. How long?
How long is it, the whole length of the boat?
Not very often because, one, for a 16-foot boat, to get a 16-foot plank, it would have to be almost 20 inches wide. There's that much shear in it. 12 feet is about the longest on, say, a 16-foot boat, 10-foot. So I run like a 12 and a 4 or 10 and a 6, and then split one in the middle, 8 and 8. That's just my building pattern.
It's called a scarf joint, where the joint
Right.
board is joined lengthwise in a scarf joint.
If you're able to take the time to watch this video of Willard Hanmer building it, he does it, and in the video, it looks like it's sped up. The man was that fast. He worked fast. He just worked, and
he had a wife that helped him work.
And yes, oh yes, yeah.
He had a shop where he could see about the hunting for fishing.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Someone wants to know, is this all white pine? And now I don't know anything about that.
Yeah, be Eastern white pine. Pinus strobus is the technical name. I've used some Michigan white pine, but it's still Pinus strobus. But the stuff that came out of Michigan, Carl had got a batch of it somewhere, but it was heavy. It was like a lot of resin in it. It was heavy.
Doesn't go.
Yeah, it was dense. Right.
I got a question about the root stock.
Yep.
I have used different types of spruce trees, and they all seem to work terrific, at least the native ones.
Yeah.
I have used Norway spruce too for ribs, and they're darn good.
I've Norway. So typically the spruce we'd use red spruce or black spruce for the ribs for these planking. White spruce, get into like the blue spruce, Norway spruce, which is planted, is also acceptable. But what I found is it grows so fast. We're looking at 10 rings to the inch. I don't know if you know that a tree puts on a ring every year, just grow. So 10 years to the inch means it grew in 10 years it grew 1 inch. Norway spruce seemed to be growing around 3, just growing so fast, and the ribs were rubbery. They were rubbery. I'm like, they work, but they seem like it would make a much more flexible boat.
The Vikings use Norway spruce.
Well, they were in Norway.
Their ships, if you look at their ships, there's a lot of similarities to a guide boat.
Very similar. Yeah. And they would, so, and tamarack worked also. Our larch our larynx that's the, but as Joe said, the grain in tamarack didn't run as true as it did in spruce. I found it to be brittle. I used it a little. I never liked it that much. But Rushton over in St. Lawrence County had a lot more bigger tamarack. He used almost exclusively tamarack in his boats, and it works. It works. It just I have not had to use it, so it's hard to get big enough, and it just seemed brittle to me. Just walking. I just have my shovel with me just in case.
I think it might be valuable for the panel to tell our audience what kind of tools do you use? Hand tools specifically?
Yeah, most of it's hand tools of the fitting and the. So I was Willard Hanmer's shop, built in 1930. Carl Hathaway worked for him in the early 60s, bought the shop in 63, to about when Willard died. I have all the original tools, everything. And really the only modern tools that Willard had brought on, because in the 30s, of course, electricity starting to come on and much bigger tools, were basically used to break down the materials, break down these into smaller materials. So band saws, table saws, electric planer, everything. But once you get something to this shape, to that size, or a rib cut out, now it's all handwork. So the assembly of the boat is handwork. The modern tools are basically to break down materials is where they came in, rather than using a crosscut saw or something. Modern high-speed planers, thickness planers to thickness the wood, that came out. And from what Carl, the tools he used versus the tools, any tool I bought, the only tool that's come along that has helped me out the most is a random orbital sander. Because when I now get done with the boat, I can give it a quick sanding with a random orbital and it won't leave swirl marks. But once I've rough sanded it, everything else still has to be hand sanded, because you have to stay with the grain lengthwise, but there's 6-inch ribs every 6 inches, so you're like sanding 6 inches, or 3 inches, and a modern vibrator sander always left a little swirl mark that you had to hand sand out anyway. So really haven't been able to mechanize things. Again, you watch that video, Willard mechanized everything he could, and you'll see him using disc sanders and table saws, and I tried one like that, and it just was scary. Carl was pretty good at it too.
Yeah.
But the trouble with a power tool, like a disc sander, you're disc sanding around, all of a sudden you sneeze, and it's like, okay, now I gotta put a patch in the boat because you just dug a big hole in it. But as far as most of the work is still hand tools. Screwdrivers, I don't use a power screwdriver, even though there's 2,500 screws. I use the Yankee push drill like Willard did, and I've gotten good with it. But most every boat I built has what I call a Yankee stamp in it, where that slips off and drives a little rectangle in the boat. Hand planes. These bevels are all put on with hand planes. Little tiny plane, and you go through and sand, do it. Plane, and it's not a flat cut. Right. It's slightly concave. This isn't flat. And the reason is, if I have two straight pieces and I put them together, the ends are going to want to lift like this. And then you tack that down, but now you've built in tension into the boat that didn't want to be there. So when you put a little concave in here, the two come together like this, and when you tack it, they press flat against each other. Plus there's a little pocket. We do use like a dolphinite, a little bedding compound in there, which takes out any imperfections of the chatter of the planing blade and the cuts and that. And there's a nice little...
You go way back, think of all the advantages that we have now. So when the guy that was making this boat had no electricity, no lights, no gasoline engines, no electric tools, nothing but daylight and his two hands. So he was able to make something, probably, far superior to anything anybody can make today. With bare hands and a couple of, metal tools. And so,
hand chisel.
What choice did he have? And so a couple things that they did that aren't done anymore, this white material that you see here, that would be that's all white lead. Yep. That would have been a paste that they put on to seal piece-to-piece connections between the stem and the planks, between the ribs and the planks, between plank to plank. And so before the vacation boats sold, you probably would have seen some of this like ghosts and shadows and leaking and leaking out in places when they were painting over them where they paint hardly matter. And so some of the boats that are taken apart even go so far as to have probably dip and screw into the white lead before they put it in through the plank or into the piece. And you take them out. not most of the time, but sometimes the screw looks like brand new because of that material that they use. But other boats without it, the screw comes out, a rusty ball, and wants to tear it apart. So, and this is probably, you're talking about a guy making this probably about 165 years ago. With no modern convenience whatsoever. Maybe he thought whatever he had was modern.
Was modern, right? He was using it, right?
Anyway, shape, or form.
And Mark touched on something too. So the original boats, that one was brass. But the original, when they first built them, 1850s, 1860s, they were using iron screws because that's what they had. Well, an iron screw, once it starts to rust, and then it also rots around the wood as it rusts. And those boats didn't really hold up 20 years because they rotted away. They were iron. But by the 1870s, 1880s or so, they basically went to nothing but brass. So you didn't have that rusting degradation, the decomposition of the screw and the wood around it. And brass. Well, copper tax, and brass is 80%, 90% copper. It's the alloy.
The USS Constitution had to be refitted.
Well, they copper sheathed it, but that was to keep shipworms and stuff out of it.
But the principle is the same. Preventing rotting.
Well, they're preventing boring worms and stuff from getting through. A little different reasoning there. But big ships didn't tend to use brass because it was, it's all different. They were kept in the water, and that made them last longer than a boat that's coming out and not being in the water all the time. And they're in salt water, different. And they was for barnacles and toreadors and.
Copper and brass are closely aligned, but not.
Well, it's a different alloy. It's the same, but a straight copper screw would be way too soft. It would just snap off. It doesn't have the strength. So they added zinc and tin, a little bit of lead, and now they have a bronze or a brass. A bunch of different alloys. You can get a master or a doctorate in metallurgy. Yeah, I know what a screw is. That's about it.
But they didn't have the hardware store.
No. Yeah, right.
You know, so where they sourced this stuff at.
Yeah.
The Cohen brothers,
Mystery to
because
me.
it was
Once they
hardware stores in 4 different communities.
right, once they got here.
They started up here, they came on mules and horses and brought their stuff up that way.
Right.
They had one in Bloomingdale, one in Saranac Lake, one in
The Old Forge.
Old Fort.
The other one,
There
yeah.
might even been more. For all
Yeah, I think you're right. There was
I can
one.
remember as a kid, Cohen's Hardware. Like down here.
This particular piece is a piece of gunnel off of the same boat, and so the evolution of things, this is something you won't see, in most of them, especially not anymore, but it was not only screwed in at each rib station to the boat, but this fellow took and did it one better, I think because he used a super light piece of wood for this gunnel. He also clinched iron nails from the inside
out.
Rounded the nail over. You can see the head of the nail.
Yeah.
A piece of the iron.
I cursed him for many a day. Trying to pull a gunnel off. It's like, what did this guy do?
They did use screws for gunnels.
But they did, yeah, for a nice light boat.
But
Well, that's what he had.
for some reason.
What he had, and because if you look at most of these boats, you'll see a screw at the gunnel height, the sheet, the top, going from the inside of the boat into just to hold that plank tight. But like I said, this man, he had clench nails.
Larger detail, the clinching that his tacks go through to keep those planks together. You can't see it very well. It's almost microscopic when this gets folded over and rounded back to itself. It's not just folded over flat.
Right.
That perfect clench actually has a curve back into the wood.
Nice round.
You can see it in that iron nail. And it's super,
Yeah.
super strong and would never come loose.
So
As a matter of fact,
Well, the wood
to get it off was to cut it.
Exactly, you gotta cut them off. Or wait till the wood fell apart. And then,
Well, and there's some powdered post beetles eating it right now.
yeah, there's those.
You were saying you went from iron to, which the ship, the boats only lasted like 20 years.
Yeah,
After they went into brass. Now how long did the boats last?
120 years. I mean,
One little thing.
yeah, that there's. I'm trying to see. That boat's probably 1900. There's the Billings is pre-1903 because that's when Billings died. This and then these old ones over here. Yeah, once they went to brass, and they went to brass pretty quick.
They probably lived an inside life, some of these that are still around, and they wouldn't be here otherwise.
Exactly.
Somebody's boathouse, somebody was.
They're in the
taking
boathouse.
care of them, otherwise they'd be lost.
Still a lot of license because the guy's mother shouldn't be selling
If you ever get a chance to go to the Sable Club, when you're hiking up to the, like Wolf Jaw or one of those places, look over at the boathouse. It's about 300 yards long. It's full 3-story high of guide boats. Been there since they've had camps on the upper
Been there in the
lower
1880s.
Sable Lakes.
It's not from the bean thing.
And there are some that are new modern boats and some are really old. And I know the caretakers that work there used to take the guide boats in the spring, put them in the water, hold them down with stones, and wait till they're soaked up, and then they could use them again. So they had to be tough. You know, to keep using them over there, probably 100-year-old boats.
Oh yeah,
Or more.
most of well, especially now. Yeah, they were. Yes.
In the book, there was a typo.
Yep.
There was one boat in there out of Holland that had strip bill from years ago.
Oh, yeah. Yes, I think it was a Leonard Anderson. Well, so in the 1880s, 1890s, 1910s, so that was a boat building technique of just strip, but other boats other than guide boats, these would be like a Peterborough coming out of Canada, were a series of strips. And then they were edge nailed, so everything was edge nailed together. Not guide boats, no.
I think it's thin.
They just. No, I don't know, and I can't even make up something why they wouldn't have done it that way. Guide boats were just built. That's how they knew to build them. Well, no, these aren't even glued. They're just edge nailed. Yeah, right, yeah, that's probably true. They just got beat up. They got used so heavily. Yeah. So a working boat's life, and I don't care if you're building a container ship today, it's about 20 years of a working boat's life, because they just get worked to death, essentially. So to have these boats that are 120 years old, one is a testament to the boat itself, and how they, as Mark said, how they were kept. They kept dry. It's a dry boat. But you also are talking about swelling it up, because they do leak. All there is this, wood to wood joint, and eventually it's going to open up a little and weep. But any boat that's built Chris Craft's sailboat, wooden sailboats, all have to take up. They depend on the swelling of the wood to make them watertight. And a guide boat is no different. I have told those people in the Au Sable Club, for you, don't sink, because they would literally. They'd put the boat in the spring down in the water and sink them.
Bobby Hickey, and then race at our races down here, was a caretaker, and still probably is. He was a bobsledder that was famous for winning the Olympics. And I used to race against him. He was a hell of a racer, but he was a caretaker on the lakes. Those lakes are probably
Bobby Hickey.
6 miles long.
Yeah, and they'd But it's like, no, don't sink them anymore. Don't sink them. For one, an owner comes in and I want my boat so it doesn't leak on Memorial Day. Okay. Then they go away and they come back July. It's like, well, now your boat leaks again, so we got to sink it again. It's like, no, just use the boat. You may get your feet wet the first couple times you use it as it takes up, but once it takes up and you're using it regularly, it'll stop that. But to sink it, now you're driving water in behind the planks and through the finish, you're expanding, contraction. It just, I was like, you're doing more damage to the boat than you are good. And most of that was all owner's convenience. Was they didn't want their boats to leak when they got there. Of course, if they're paying the freight, I'll sink your boat if you're, that's what.
Amount of soaking is going to fix it.
Well, and then exactly, and then when they don't take up anymore, once they stop, it's like, and you're rowing it, and it's not taken up anymore. Well, now he needs to get stripped right back to wood and fix whatever issues there are, and get new finish on it, and tighten the boat back up.
The rules on Osage Lake was it only can be guide boats used on those lakes.
Oh yeah.
So if they wanted to go to camp, they had to use their own boat.
Yeah.
But they had to have inspected by the caretaker to make sure that it would pass.
I was sure they were on a skid for that.
Yeah.
And it was used. They didn't like it because it was heavier than bigger than guide boats. And it was
Right. Oh, yeah. They're heavy, and they have a boat up there called the Westport boat, which were built they came out Westport off of Lake Champlain. But that seems to be the only place those boats were ever used, and I've ever seen them. They're a guide boat, and they're all guide boat construction, but they're big and they're heavy. I built two of them for a guy up there, and I basically had to charge him double. I mean, it's like you got two boats worth of materials going into this one boat. But you could put 1,500 pounds in that boat. And the thing will float, that far off the gunnels. Things were huge and heavy and. Yeah.
If you search the internet, you'll find some neat pictures of loaded guide boats with the guide and the hunter, a deer, two dogs, and about
there's one in there. Yeah. Oh, there is on right there. Well, that's a different one. That's another. But I once, and I maybe you've seen this. I saw a picture one time, and I cannot tell you where, but it was an 18-foot boat with 2x8s across it, maybe even 2x12s, and on it is a freaking Glenwood cast iron cookstone, and they're rowing it across. I don't know what lake it is. Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah,
Mark's boat,
and I mean
over there.
That big wide one. Yeah,
That's 4 feet wide.
yeah. I was looking.
4 feet?
Yeah.
16-footer.
But a Glenwood range, that's 800 pounds.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
This doesn't feel like it's gone into mass production.
No, they're not. No. Well, so now you're getting into.
That's how much freeboard.
But there's 4 hounds in that picture.
Don't wiggle, whatever.
Don't forget the hounds. There's 4 hounds in that boat.
They were pretty light though.
The hounds were little skinny. Yeah. And then these guys. I mean, now this picture is a very famous Stoddard picture, and it's obviously staged. I mean, this was, you notice there isn't a ripple in the water. It's like, but I gotta say, it's November, late November, December, and you're leaving hunting camp to get home. You got one shot to make it out. The ice is skimming behind you. You have that boat just as loaded as you can. And I'm not sure I'd take this across St. Regis or Upper Sanac or Tupper, but they were loaded. They'll take an 800,000 pound load.
There are specific guide boats they call church.
Then there was the big.
And the whole family hopped in, went to church, rowing to church, because on Upper Saranac there was churches on the islands. Down in Fort Lake there's churches on the islands. A lot of places have that. They had run that. And you can tell me more. Were they pretty much exact guidebooks? Like you?
Yeah, it's just a big 20, 22-foot guidebooks. Why, there might almost have been one here. You really wanted to say that, didn't you?
We had a little argument about whether we could get it up the back stairs.
You wouldn't.
And what? I was going to use a crate.
Come up over the rail.
She's like, no, we'll get Madden's and crane it right in here. I'm like, yeah, homework. So guide boats would come anywhere from a 12-footer, which would typically be used on a pond. You could carry that boat out into fish pond and back 5 miles back to a nice trout pond, whatever. Up to 22, 24, these big church boats, we put 8, 10 people in, or I make the distinction between a church boat and a freight boat. A freight boat being usually painted and a little rougher work boat, but of the same size where they're bringing, because you wouldn't put all your fancy clothes on and then get in the old work boat. You had a nice church boat, as they'd say. But it's essentially just these big, but it's all guide boat construction. It's all the same.
Why is this called?
Because it's Willard's whimsy. Willard Hanmer built, maybe a dozen we've run into of that style boat, and that is just what the people either on St. Regis wanted, but the other story I'd heard, Marty Pfeiffer, who was a fisheries in DEC, they hauled all the, when they netted the trout to get the eggs, they're working out of guide boats, and he wanted one bigger, wider, that they could actually pull nets out of, and they had Willard buildings. That was the good, right? Yeah.
Guide boat material.
It's all guide boat material, ribs, everything, and that boat probably weighs 80 pounds. So again, they could go back into these trout ponds and what do they milk the fish? What's that called? But when they take the eggs, you got to net the fish first, and then they strip the eggs out and take them back to the hatchery to raise them. So that's one story. Was the Willard that? But
They were way ahead before Marty Pfeiffer.
well, yeah, because Marty was in the 60s. These came back in the 40s. But he also. That one says 1945, which is about when he started building them. But you see the little piece of, basically it's a piece of linoleum on the back. So at that time, outboards are coming out. So you'd put a little 2-horsepower Seagull little motor on the thing.
I fished out of those boats when I was a kid. Jack Drury, you probably know Jack. His aunt was Mrs. Harris, right on Lower Saranac, and she had one of these boats. We fished between Lower Saranac and the main road. There's a little tiny pond in there.
Yeah.
And that's the first time I ever fished in one of those.
Right.
And they're lighter than a feather.
Yeah.
And it was stable in the water.
Yeah.
That's all.
Very, very stable. You could get up and fly, stand up and fly fish out of that. Which some people didn't like guide boats, the sports, because they couldn't stand up to fly fish. It's like, well, you can sit down and fly fish, but being used to standing up and fly fishing. The only trouble with that boat is by yourself with no gear or anything, you can barely make that thing go straight because it sits right up on top of the water, maybe draws an inch, and it just skitters all over the place. You're trying to keep that thing going straight.
The styling, the styling looks just like a Pinion. Pinion was building them about that time, but they canvassed them, and they used steam bent cedar ribs, if you can imagine, and they used all cedar planking and then the canvas. And they were a favorite of a lot of fishermen in that era. I do know that too.
Old Town, too.
An Old Town. Right, made those, yes.
Your father fixed a lot of them. He was good. He was a carpet man.
Yeah. Which all all those, basically the guide boat came first, and everything of those small fishing boats came out of the guide boat. Because there really were no small fishing boats like this pre-1850s. They just weren't, because it wasn't a thing. It wasn't it wasn't until. Well, right. Yeah, yes. I mean, they did have small boats, but not, like Steve said, they just were heavy.
You're talking about this, in Brazil, you're talking about the boat?
The rocker, right?
Yeah, and so that didn't have that.
No, it does, but what that boat does is, if you look at any of them, they come from a really steep V and they tip out maybe to 20 degrees and then back to a steep V, double-ended boats. This one starts at a deep V and then just goes flat and has, from the middle back has, a 3 foot just flat on there.
You take that boat later on and put it up on an angle so you can see the bottom of the boat. You take the brace out that's there holding it that way and set it flat on the top. You're going to see the rock.
It'll rock, and
You could rock it.
Yeah.
Literally rock it.
So you couldn't set it on.
You can't do it now
flat.
because it's propped up.
Yeah. So the original boats, building 1850s, 1860s, did have little narrow transoms in them, square transoms, because that's how they knew how to build boats. And I've seen pictures in this book, and I've seen one up in the Ausable Club, and they were carved out with an axe. They were carved out of a spruce stump, but they just carved it, literally carved it with an axe, and that lasted maybe 10 years, and somebody figured out, well, why not just make it double-ended? And because that's what the boats were originally, that's what they knew how to build. But with a transom, you're going up on a beach and you're getting following waves, the guy in the back's getting all wet, you couldn't really push off back into waves, oncoming waves, whereas the double-ended boat, you can push it out and it'll cut either way. So pretty quickly they did away with the transom.
You got to remember too that the guides relied on their guests for a living, and most of the resort hotels had some arrangement with the guides that the guides would come to the resort hotel and then they would hire them out. And this is a picture of the Sagamore Hotel in Long Lake, New York, and you can see there's more than a dozen of the guide boats on the shore, and then the guides are taking people out for rides, for fishing, for hunting, all of that. And that was one of the main uses of the guide boat. For the guys to make a living, they had to be able to take people out of the boats and use them.
It's actually
That's a good one. Put you in the penitentiary. What makes a guide boat? The use of the term guide boat is regional. So there's regional guide boats. Up on the St. Lawrence, a guide's boat would have been a skiff for muskellunge fishing, something completely big, heavy, stable boat. So the Adirondack guide boat, the distinctions of it is a flat bottom board, meaning it's not a plank on edge keel. It's a flat bottom board, which is dory construction that comes out of a line of what dories were built like. It's sawn natural crook ribs. Very few other boats have that. But that would have been, the Vikings been building like that since 300 AD with these natural crook ribs. And the overlapped planking, but it's beveled so that it's smooth skin. Those are the three main distinctions of an Adirondack guide boat.
The Vikings had a lap strake, right?
And they had a lap strake. So lap strake, overlapping, strake is the run of planking. So overlapping planking is lap strake. Technically, these are lap strake boats, but they're smooth skin lap strake. So
The regular lap strake is a much easier way to do it.
much easier, much quicker. It's
more stable.
Right. And they wouldn't use these natural crooks in a natural lap strake boat because you can just bang steam bent ribs in a lot quicker. It was heavier, but we here in the Adirondacks, there's a lot of little waterways, but you're constantly carrying your boat from one to the next. You go up to Maine or Michigan or Minnesota, or those, you can go hundreds of miles before you had to carry your boat. So a big, heavy boat didn't matter. Here, weight was critical because you had to carry the boat.
I'm probably going to get some resistance from this, but Long Lake is reputedly the origination of the guide boat. It was Mitchell Status in the mid-1880s.
Right.
So I'm going to say that, put it out there.
You'll get a little pushback from that.
I can tell you that. I obviously, have you read the book by the Rainbow Lake Warden?
Right.
She can tell you about Mitchell, because the Wardeners were settling in Rainbow Lake, which is 18 miles north of here, and they're still up there. They come every year. They have camps. And when they were first coming into Rainbow Lake, the lake was inhabited by the Abenaki during the summer for hunting for deer and fishing for brook trout. And he did build guidebooks, but he learned from other people. Because the natives never used tacks or screws to build their boats, but he did learn how. And he was practicing.
This book,
His father also was living with him too, and his whole family.
right. This is the Adirondack. Oh,
Footsteps, buried footsteps, and
In the Adirondacks. I can't tell you the
Something
exact name.
trails and
Joni
sunsets.
Wardner wrote the book.
Foot trails and sunsets in the Adirondacks.
Joni Wardner wrote the book about her great grandfather. And
Wardner.
it's an amazing book
Yeah.
about it's not just Rainbow Lake. It has all about when, this was even before Paul Smith came up to start it. They stayed in his cabin on Osgood, and they hunted deer every winter and took the deer down to Willsboro, because that's where they came from, the Warders, and sold them. And in 3 years' time, they made enough money by selling the venison, they could build a hotel on Rainbow Lake, buy property and build a hotel. So they were killing thousands of deer every year. There was no flaw.
We're getting more into the history of all this stuff and less into construction, as he pointed out.
Sorry.
What about the ribs? What about the shape of the ribs? How about the angle where the planking comes into the stem and the stern? How do you do all that? Those are the kind of questions you could get answered by this group. History is in a book. You can go read it in a book or watch it on TV. But the actual construction, you're not going to find in a book. It's here, it's here, it's there.
And I see a lot of great heads here myself. What about the future? Where is the guidebook going? Are kids going to be involved? John, I really part of the enterprise that you run the woodworking and several other type situations for kids and drawing.
I think the important part in the future of guidebooks is you've got to get the kids involved or the younger generation involved, and that is difficult. You're competing against phones, you're competing against sports, all that kind of stuff. But I think
That's why there's no freaking guidebook kids coming out of Long Lake, and there's no kids in Senate, they want to keep Long Lake. It's up to us to decide. That's what it is. That's why it died.
yeah.
The problem is,
I gotta say this about your dad. He was an amazing man. At his age, what he could do. I always figured he had to go to work every day, and I might be wrong about that, but he was one strong man at a very old age.
Yeah, he was. He had a passion for guideboats and a passion for the younger kids. So that was important. So I think each of you, it's your responsibility. You're going to have to figure out some way, whether it be a little class to make a birdhouse, whether it's a little class to make a wooden lamp. You've got to have something that the kids can do with their hands and get an interest in that woodworking. I'm a volunteer at Hands on Deck in Green Bay at our marina. We're a nonprofit. And we were established in 2016 by a guy, Mark Hawkins. And Mark had a vision that he wanted to get kids involved. So he started it as a nonprofit. They built their first little boat, an 8-foot wheelbarrow boat, in the library in Green Bay. And they built it all with kids, plank construction, just hammer it together. The kids used a saw and a hammer, and that's about it to put this boat together. It's called a wheelbarrow boat because it has a little wheel on one end and holes on the other end that you put the oars through, and you pick up the handles of the oars and you wheel it around.
That's pretty
So
cool.
that was the first project they did, and then it's expanded since then. And we have a couple of volunteer instructors now that are teaching kids from 5 years to 8 years in elementary mechanical skills. They get to make their own ruler. They get to make their own square. They learn to use hand saws, hammers, nails, all that. And they build a lot of these little projects. Most of the kids, as you know, once COVID came, that's it, no interest anymore for classes. But by making it offered to homeschoolers, they're able to have some classes during the day for a couple hours with homeschoolers. So the parents like that. It gets the kids out of their hair, but yet the kids are doing something that's going to improve them year after year after year. So that's our younger kids. And then we've got a class in mechanical skills, beginning mechanical skills, for ages 10 to 12. And those kids get more involved in some basic electrical tools and that kind of stuff with more complex projects. So I've done some Pinewood Derby races where the kids make their own cars out of a block of wood and, cut them out and this kind of stuff, and then we race them and that kind of stuff. But I challenge you guys that you're going to have to find some way to get a little class or something just to get some kids involved. I think you'll be amazed that once the kids get into this, how well they'll do.
Well, what sparked you?
Pardon?
What sparked you guys? What you did?
I started building full boats probably 1960, and we raced them in the first Hanmer. I was 8 or 9 years old, and my brother was definitely a couple years younger. And we had 2 of the small 10-footers, and they were light. Pick them up on a canoe trip. They were before kayaks were cool. There were really no kayaks to speak of. There were some fiberglass ones made by full boat, but they were the first boats I saw that once you learn to build one yourself, which I did with my father. Very simple to build them, frames and then strips, and then put the coverings on the outside and then over the top.
Skid on frame is basically what that is. You build your frame out of wood and then you skid it.
It was, and then you got double-bladed paddles. And my father ran the North Hudson River Derby with Rex Brusco. In fact, their son is putting in a trophy for, is it for the kayak? And I still have his kayak from those days. They got crushed in Dave Young's beta barn out in Gabriel's. I got it, or he said take it, and I spent a winter fixing it. And they're not guide boats, but I'll tell you what, they're very seaworthy. You can run them down the North Hudson when it's springtime, and they won the race every year they ran it, and they were in their 50s. So,
But that's what started doing it in your family.
yeah, my father.
What made you want to do this? That's what you look for in the younger generation.
I had a wooden canvas canoe in my teenage years, and friends of mine had guide boats, and Paul Smith's at college was a guide boat. I rode that, and I had rode other bigger skiffs or whatever. I immediately fell in love with it. It's like, I'd much rather row a boat than paddle it. And I always wanted a guide boat, and the only way I was ever going to get one was learn to build it. And I was lucky enough to get in with Carl Hathaway and Ralph Morrow through North Country Community College. Had Adirondack Studies curriculum, and one of their apprenticeships was a guide boat apprenticeship with Carl and Ralph, who in 1980 were like the last 2 guide boat builders left. And so I was lucky enough to get into that, and then I got hung around Carl enough that he hired me and then bought the shop from him. essentially.
The problem that we have today is where can you go, what shop can you go build a boat in to show the kids how to build a guide boat from the ground up? Well, that's going to be awful hard to do. But I can take a bunch of kids and I can take them 1/4-inch thick pine, and I can show them how to put a feather edge on it, and they practice that. You don't have to do it on the boat. You still got to do the same skill, so you learn how to do that. You make a rib, and you show them how to do the rib, and how do you put the angles on. How do you figure out what the angles are? You can do all of the parts for a guide boat and never build a guide boat, but you can learn all of the skills. And then you can apply it someday, hopefully, to building a boat. Well, I never did stuff like this that I got in that class with Chris. Never. I didn't even have a saw when I first built the boat. Not even a saw. I got lots of them now, as you can tell.
I did take the course from Carl and Ralph, and that was beneficial. And also, I didn't build a boat on my own for a long time, and I went over to see Joe. And Joe said, why did you forget all this stuff, Greg? You don't really, until you watch and learn from a master, you know. So I guess I can do it. So I went ahead and did it.
A lot of people don't think that they can do that, and I get that all the time. Oh, it's too complicated. I can't do that. Well, it is complicated if you look at it all, but little parts are not complicated. Mathematics is complicated. Wait a minute. Let me finish this through. Mathematics is very complicated, right? Are the numbers complicated, 1 through 10? No. But how you can manipulate them is complicated. But you learn how to do that. But if you can't make the number to begin with, you don't know what they look like, then you can't do anything. So you got to learn the basic thing.
And I think that the question is, what are we going to do? What are we going to do tomorrow? Look, this is gray hair. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 12 But we are the today. We are yesterday. We tried to bring back the race. We brought back the show. We're bringing back, we added art to, that's a step to the future. What are we going to do with to teach people to go back and look at what we were and what we still can be?
You gotta figure out what they can do with this song.
Have a place that looks like this every day?
Can I just say, just a quick, part of our advantage growing up was the uncles, the grandfathers, the fathers. These boats were in existence when I was a kid, and we got to use them. We got to use them as kids. Not the boats that were in camps, but the boats that you guys restored and restored, you know, got them to float again and raced them and ran them. We had boats as a kids. The kids today don't have that, that there just aren't boats out there for them. They're boats that go down the river. It's like, I'm looking at some of these boats, it's like, there's no way you should be taking that boat down the river. It's like, that boat is, you know, it's just, it's too, but then again, it's like, that's what you want to do. I like to see the boats used. So getting kids interested in these boats started with putting them in a boat when they were very young. And then they have this appreciation of the boat itself. That being said, the knowledge of how to build a new boat is out there. And I think that is safe and that is not going anywhere. There's enough people that can figure out how to build a new one. The problem, Ralph always said this, the issue, the mainstay of these boats is the repair work, because it's a lot harder to take a stem out of a boat and then fit a stem back into what's already there. And that's what's going to get lost, and I see this. But on the other hand, it's a very niche market. It's like, it's very small. You couldn't have 6, 7 guys now all competing with each other to do the repair work, because there isn't 6 or 7 guys worth of repair work out there to be had. So it's a very small segment. But the new building, and quite frankly, I'm a to be a traditionalist, I mean, because I do it all traditional, but if I was starting out today, I'd laminate ribs. It's like, you can't, who's going to go out and dig a spruce stump? You can't find them, for one. But to laminate ribs up, it's like, you can do those nice and strong. I may still plank them traditionally. White pine, you can get white pine, you can get planking easy. But it's the ribs are the limiting factor for building new ones. So you might laminate those, and then you get into this whole how to strip it. But if I was teaching kids how to do it, first boat they'd be building are strip boats. Here, build a boat. You get an idea of, because there's nothing straight on a boat. It's like anybody can build a box and make it pretty and put it up in the kitchen, call it a cabinet. You can't build a boat because there's nothing straight, plumb, or level on it.
One thing about the pine in a guide boat is special. It's quarter saw, which means the grain runs straight down the board this way, and you see the lines in it. It's not flat sawed where the grain goes across the board like this. A flat grain boat, when you see them, they're no good.
Yeah.
They're no good. The strongest boat has straight grain bolts that are quarter saw. And that took years probably for guys to figure that out. It was probably easier to plank with those others, but they crack.
But they crack. Right.
Let me
So how are you going to teach kids?
How are we going to do that? How are we going to do that, Chris?
I've tried for years.
There's a program called the Guideboat Academy, and we're going to try that in August, or maybe July. But I want to see every one of you on the shore with your boats, and we will advertise the program. I want to see little kids in those boats. I want to show them how to do it. We'll give them a little certificate. We'll have a tiny little race after 3 days or 2 days. But if you don't do it, the pain that you deal with, the things that make all of us here so excited when we see that boat. A man took a guide boat out during the eclipse, and a photographer took a picture of it. Oh my God, that's wonderful. You're yesterday. No, you're tomorrow if you will just say, I don't want to build it today. I want to show little kids how to do it. And by the way, we have 2 adults that have already signed up for that course. I did use your names.
Say you lost their names?
Pardon?
Did you say you lost their names already?
No, I didn't, Christopher.
You're just not going to use their names. Okay.
That's my son, he can pick on me, but he has already promised he will bring a boat or 2, and he will teach what you guys know how to do, and others, they don't have that advantage. Well, my son's got a couple boats. He can't row both of them, but he can row one at a time with kids in it, or a couple other people that just learn. You are tomorrow. And I will listen to you all afternoon about yesterday, because I missed it. But I want you to do it tomorrow.
Tom Clement's boat sitting over in that corner. I can remember that on my first canoe trip. Tom Sr., who was in college with my father, they went to school way back.
Yeah?
Way back. And that boat leaked like a sieve. But he kept a little can in the boat, and he stayed right up with the rest of us. And he was no youngster. I mean,
And you're coming down.
And he slept under it.
Are you going to come down to the shore of Lake Flower when I tell you what day to be there with a boat?
Possibly.
Listen, possibly is better than no.
I have tried with all 3 of my girls to take up a little guide boat building, because that'd be the first, would have been the first girl. There is one in Lake Clear, I believe, still, that build guide boats. And I only had one that she'd go out in the shop, and she wanted to play on that bandsaw and make things, and she did good. But she never would get interested in a boat. So I tried. I have several grandsons and granddaughters, but I can't.
Well, that's why we've done this. That's why we brought this back. There's a show here boat race, whether young Mr. Willard wants to see him go down the river. This young man, who's 75 years old, and he is going down the river in a one-man guide boat, and he's going to be on the lake in a two-man guide boat. Well, it's 75. Come on, you guys. Let's get.
How old was your dad when he was racing?
Well, I had a long conversation with my friend Sherry Firo, who is one of the local Boy Scout leaders, and her Boy Scout troop numbers have been diminished rapidly to the point where she has maybe 3 or 4 kids who are interested in the outdoors, one who will come for certain events, but the rest of them are playing on the telephone.
But one person that has passion for this is going to tell other people.
It's going to start with inspiration. It's going to start with them seeing it. They can't be inspired to do it if they don't ever see it or don't know anything about it. They're not going to find this on the internet. They're not going to actually find this.
No,
And Joe has a point. I think everybody has a point. Like, I've never built a guide boat, but if you take, like Joe said, you don't need to know how to do the entire thing right off the bat. Like this piece came from this same boat. So I've never built a boat, but if you give me any piece of it, I will make the piece, the exact piece, to go back on it. And so that's how he said, it all started with one little thing. You know, and mine was, you know, when I was about 10 years old, I went to Gender and Lumber and I said, do you have any wood I can build a boat? And Phil said, sure, I'll sell you some wood. And so they delivered, I think Carl brought these screws and these couple pieces of plywood, he dropped it off in my driveway, here's your boat. And I built a boat.
I can remember
Two
when
pieces of plywood.
your grandfather, I can remember when your grandfather was going to build guide boats, and he was going to laminate the ribs, and that was
And he
way
would
back.
make molds of
Way, that was before
and all the
anything.
molds and everything else. So, I mean, this all has to start with something, and what you're doing right now, I think, is a great start. You know, bring some kids in here and look at this stuff, and, oh my God. Yeah. Look at this stuff.
I've got a question. One of them is, what is this here?
Carrying yoke. So, can we take that out of the boat? Just pop it right out. It just lifts. And put it right on your shoulders.
Really?
Yep. And yep, that's how. So the boat rests on that. That's how you carry it.
It probably came from imagine carrying a bucket on each side of it.
Exactly.
Seriously,
Bro, that's it.
Water.
Yeah.
Well, maybe bringing water to your house. Same idea.
Wow. And the other thing is, the most beautiful, but so is this. Correct.
The stretcher.
Who came up with the first one of those, I wonder?
Timmy Doyle.
Somebody trying to sell.
Tim Doyle.
Tim Doyle.
Tim Doyle had a bunch of
Well, we've always had a good book.
Right. He was the first ones I'd seen make it.
Joe said he had that the idea.
Well, that's a lot of it, yes.
Carl Hathaway could build a boat. Some of the finest construction you'll ever see. The wood fits perfectly, but the boats are ugly. He wanted to give me his pattern so I could build my first boat. I didn't want any part of it.
So,
Because it was an ugly boat.
well, Carl and Ralph both were technicians. They were craftsmen, but they were technicians. They didn't really, I wouldn't say he had the artist's eye for it. The lines.
Long lake, possibility of long lake.
But he could put them together.
I will, but I think they coincide real close. I don't know. What I've read about them, I've seen pictures of them.
So great.
This
Is there any more questions?
this is going to be continued, I'm sure, year after year.
Somebody, you write the grant and we'll be glad to spend it.
Well, if it wasn't for North Country College,
Well, this would be done.
That's right.
It would have been gone.
One at a time.
North Country College, we went to class with Carl Hathaway and Ralph Morrow, and we built one boat each. You know, not each, but all the class. Sometimes the class would be 5 or 6 people. Sometimes there'd be 2. But I went every night, and I had kids, and I was working full time. But you know, it was hard because of the time. It was at night, and
It was.
I loved every minute of it, and a lot of guys did.
Yeah.
You know, and I would say out of the class, maybe 1 or 2 filled the guy.
Frosty Freeman took that boat. That was. Did you know her, John?
Was that?
Frosty Freeman. She married Freeman. She was.
Frosty Lemoyne?
What's his name? Austin.
Oh, Kevin.
Bunny. Bunny's Austin's niece. She was Austin.
One is from Long Lake.
One of the things we learned how to do
But he
was how to cane a chair.
didn't want to.
Part of the class, we learned how to build a chair and cane it.
Right? You remember that?
We had this
You
guy
can't
from,
stop us now, Sue. Yeah.
we had this guy from Lake Georgia who would come up.
He wanted somebody in his family to take over.
Nicest guy you ever met in your life.
Couldn't get him.
He was a beautiful person, but he was a first-class klutz. But he was such a likable guy, you had to like him. We're caning away on the chairs and learning how to do this. All of a sudden, it was time for coffee and donuts. So take a break. Carl's wife brought in the donuts. We had the coffee. And we go to get up and go do some more. Had our coffee. He caned himself into the chair. He had the cane going around one leg and around the other one, all like this. And it was the most funny thing you ever want to see in your life. But the guy never got upset. He shoved it off and it was cool with him. Of course, we didn't make too much fun of him. Not in his presence.
The other one
when we had the chance.
come in, work like hell for 3 days.
That's what
be
it
gone
is.
for 3 weeks.
You gotta love what you do or you don't do well.
You have to come back tomorrow.
Gentlemen, I really appreciate you being with us, and even though us is small, we started 3 years ago to bring all this stuff back, and this boat show is a result, and next year this round table will be bigger and better, and people will understand, and
Your idea of getting the youth involved is the only way it's going to continue. And how it can be done, I don't know. I will say North Country helped
Pretty much
keeping
all
it going.
close to that.
thank you again,
Yeah.
and I hope to see you at a race that we're having here on Sunday. That's me. That's you? Yeah.
She is a salesperson.
Oh, she's a cheerleader. Biggest mistake.